everyone. Time for another track breakdown. And this time we're going to look at my track Spaceflex, which is out now on Safust Music. I'll put a link in the description if you want to go check it out. So before we get into the nitty-gritty here, a couple things to note. This project that we're in isn't the final version of this track. I ended up, bouncing out audio stems and doing a mix down. But I felt like this was the best track, or excuse me, the best project to do the track breakdown in. So a couple things are bounced to audio too in this project. So I'll kind of do my best to remember how I made some of these parts that are bounced to audio, but I think there's still lots of good little tidbits of information in here. So let's dive in. We'll just take this section by section. We'll look at the drums first, then we'll move on to the bass, sounds, and then the musical elements and the synths, and then lastly we'll have a look at the effects. So let's just start with the kick here. So at the start there's a little bit of a low cut happening. And then there's the full-on kick right there. So let's have a look in the mixer. This kick is made up of two separate kicks. I have a low kick here, which is a 808 style kick, all the top ends rolled off. And then I paired that with this top kick here. You can hear the top kick on its own. And obviously the top kick has all the low end taken out of it, so just got that nice click. Both of these are being sent over to this kick bus here, which I added a little bit of I saturated it quite heavily. You can hear it without it, which really just helps glue those two kicks together. And then I followed that with some EQ work. Just rolled off everything below 40 on this particular track. I don't always cut quite that high on my kicks, but I must have felt like it was necessary in this particular project. A little scoop out of the 200 range, which a lot of times I find that really helps give a little extra room for the bass. There's a lot of stuff that happens in that 200 hertz area. It might be, the low end of synths down there, or lead sounds, bass sounds. So I find scooping a little bit of that area out on the kick can really help, clear things up and help things kind of gel and sit together a little bit nicer. And then also a little scoop out of the mid-range around 650, probably just to make room for the melodics and the synth parts in this track, which is something I don't always do. It really depends on a track by track basis. And then I just rolled off the very, very top end, just because there must have been a little much. Let's hear it without that. Yeah, just softens the kick up a little bit. So. And all of my drums are running through these parallel tracks. We'll just touch on these while we're here. I have it going through a parallel compression track. So before the compressor, I have this Helos 69 EQ from UAD. This is they have a newer version out now, but at the time that I made this track, the new version wasn't out. So this is the legacy version. It just gives a nice analog character, and I have a little boost at 100 hertz, and then at 10K I have a boost in the high end. And then that's running into the compressor, which is the SSL bus compressor, and classic parallel compression settings, fast attack, fast release, high ratio. And that's just really pushing that kick forward in all the drums, in fact. It helps gel everything together even better. And then also I have a little distortion parallel track set up. For this, I'm using the Double Lock from Sound Toys, and just a little bit of the mid-range scooped out on this. You can hear just the distortion track working there. And again, all of my drums are running through these two tracks. Okay, so let's move on. The next synth part, or excuse me, not synth part, not quite there yet. The next drum element is the closed hi-hat here. Pretty simple, just a white noisy wide hat. Obviously there's quite a bit of low end in this one, so I took that out. Just followed that with another filter to clean that up even more. But nothing special there, just a simple offbeat eighth hat. And then we have this little shaker, which really gives a nice push of energy. You hear that little roll at the end of every 4 bars. Let's have a look at the shaker here. So there were some pretty nasty frequencies in here, it looks like, so I just notched those out with an EQ and then cleaned up the low end, rolled off the very, very tippy top. Let's hear it without that EQ. Have a little distortion here. I really like this little distortion plugin. It works, or it really just sounds nice on the upper mids and top end elements. So this is giving it a little boost, and then have a little sparkle reverb here. So if I want to give something just a touch of a sparkly ambience, but I don't want a really decayed tail at all on it, what I'll do is I'll maybe use just the stock reverb here. I'll push up the early reflections quite high and then bring down the decay pretty much all the way, and then just tickle in a little bit of the mix, and that just gives a nice little sparkle ambience to the sound. So if I just mute the kick and that hat, we'll just listen to just the shaker for a second. Without, I mean, that's very subtle what I have, but you can hear the effect there if I turn it up. Yeah, it's very subtle, but just giving it a little ambience there. And then just to keep it a little bit more lively and moving around, I just added a auto panner here, over a 2-bar sequence. And then a decent amount of sidechain. The next sound is this little beep sound, which is so subliminal you can barely pick it out, but I really feel like it just adds something, and that's just playing quarter notes. It's layered on top of the kick. So if I just mute these, you can hear what it's doing there. This little bracket EQ just to make sure there's no unnecessary low end and very top end. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on this particular sound. I actually made a video on this sound, and I showed you exactly how I made it and all the details and all that stuff. So I'll put that up there if you want to go check out that video. Let's move on. Okay, so looks like we have this little top loop that comes in here. Let's turn the other sounds back on. And this little top loop here is really just meant to kind of help glue the drums together a little bit. And let's hear it. Just rolled off the low end. Yeah, don't need that low end in there. And just notched out a little harsh frequency here at 4K, and then again use the defacer distortion plugin to give it a little boost, and then a little touch of side chaining on that. And that comes in with the actual main snare here. Let's turn everything back on. So you got that double kick and then the snare and that top loop come in. Let's have a look at the snare. All right, so the snare was just you know, a one shot that I found in my many sample packs that I thought fit quite nice. I tightened it up a little bit with the transient designer here, and just rolled off the very low end, below 150, again using the defacer plugin. At the time that I made this track, I was using this plugin quite a lot, apparently. Okay, so not too much else to explain there, I don't think. But you can see in the actual waveform here, you know, I made a little 4-bar loop here, and you can see there's some variations in the snare. So, you know, messed with, you know, the velocity and the low pass filter. So I just took a little bit of the high end off some of these snares just to give it a little bit more groove and variation. But I actually worked that into the audio file here. Okay, so let's move right along. So the next elements we have entering the mix is these little accents. Let's have a listen to those. Those are quite subliminal. So we have this snare accent and the hat hit, it looks like. Kind of doing like a left-right thing. So on the snare accent, little EQ work, cutting the lows, bringing out a little bit of that 2.5 area, and then rolling off some of the top end. This time I used the wave shaper to give it a little bit of a boost. This is something that I like to use just to give something a little bit more body and beef it up a little bit. And then it looks like I used the convolution reverb on this, just give it a little space. And then the hat hit. Rolled off the low end, very top end. This delay is giving it the character. You can hear that. Take it off, and pretty plain Jane. So on this delay, something I like to do from time to time is just take off the tempo sync and just give something a really, really short delay, and add a little distortion to the feedback, and it just gives it a lot more character. It makes it much more interesting. And then use the, looks like the same convolution reverb on that as well. And that's just kind of doing a left, right, back and forth. Really subtle in the mix, but just in the background, just to make the groove a little bit more interesting. And then we have this perk rhythm here. So just a little notch out around 208 here. Now I did make this, I programmed this, I worked a little bit of automation and modulation into the sound, I remember, but I can't tell you exactly where that sound came from or what I did to it, because I bounced it out, and it's been quite a while since I made this track. So, but that's just there to, you know, fill out some of the space in the groove and just pick up the energy a little bit. And then we have this perk here, which comes in next. Nice kind of like crunchy percussion hits there. And what is that, perk one? Just an EQ on this, around 150, and I don't think I did anything to this. I was just a sample that I found that I quite liked and I thought fit the groove, and just I think it came from a loop actually, and I just cut out this little piece and dropped it in here. And that's it. Just rolled off the low end. Sometimes sounds don't need a bunch of processing. They're, you know, good as is. It's an important thing to remember. You don't always need to process something. If it sounds good, it is good. So that's a little perk. And then there's some interesting things happening with these rides here, which is the next drum element that enters the track. So let's have a listen to those. So these are a very important element in this track, I think. So let me show you what I did here. So I have two copies of the same ride. On this one, I panned it over to the left a little bit, and I just, you know, there was some unnecessary low end here. Let's just mute the right side for a second. And cleaned up some resonating frequencies that were a little bit unpleasant. And on this one, what I did was I just gave it this this ambience plate reverb, and I set the mix quite high, 50%, and then gave it a little bit of a just standard sidechain. On the right side, what I did, this is the same, just a copy of the same ride, pretty much the same EQ, it looks like, a little bit different actually. So I EQ'd it slightly different. This one's panned over a little bit more to the right, and if I can get these out of the way. And I also gave it the same ambience plate reverb, but it's mixed higher. So the other one was at 50%, this one's at 67. My thought was to kind of offset these. So the more reverb you have on something, the further back in the mix it's going to appear. So the ride on the left is going to appear a little bit closer, and it's not panned quite as hard to the left. And the ride on the right is going to be slightly more panned and a little bit more pushed back. just to kind of create that separation and enhance the depth of the track. So I followed this with this driver plugin from Native Instruments, and that's just giving it a little extra, grit and texture compared to the other one. Again, kind of even greatly accentuating the separation between those two. And then instead of giving this one a standard side chain like I did on the left side, I just gave it this little ramp curve. So over 3/4 of a bar, and because it's not a 1-bar loop or a half-bar loop or a standard time setting, because it's over 3/4 of a bar, it kind of gives this slight little ramp in volume over, the 3/4 of a bar, which I think really adds to, just the groove in general. So let's listen to that. And you'll hear it's not mixed very high, this little volume ramp, but you can definitely hear it in there. The right side just kind of sweeps up every so often. Let's listen to that. Yeah. So I think those are really working nice together. And then another thing that I did here, which really helps build the tension and energy in this track, was I just took the left ride that's panned to the left, and I pitched that one up, I think 2 semitones. Let's have a look at that. Yeah. So in certain sections of this track, only the left ride is being pitched up, and that really creates this tension and build as those 2 rides are even pulling further apart. So let's come over here where that's starting to happen, so you can get a little taste of that. So you can hear there, it's really, building the tension in a nice way, I think. Okay. As far as, we have one more percussion element here, and it's this little noise groove. I remember adding this in a little bit later in the track. I just felt like when reaching this point of the track, it just needed a little something extra, just a little extra pick-me-up, something that's not too prominent, but just helps pick up the energy. So let's have a listen to this little noise groove here. And it's also kind of an offset to the perk rhythm. So this one's, panned over to the left, and that little perk rhythm is playing more on the right side. So this, obviously I bounced out, but it's simply just white noise with a little distortion, maybe a little bit of flanger or phaser on there, playing a simple rhythm with some delay. That's all that is. Probably a little side chaining as well. Super simple, just to help fill out the groove, pick up the energy. And that's all of the drum elements in this track. So not a lot as far as drums go. pretty simple. And we just have this little kick fill right here. Probably should turn it on though. Okay, so let's move on to the bass sounds. Okay, so we have the sub bass here, which is present right from the beginning. I'll just go. Which is just a rolling style low bass. And I've done multiple videos on how I make these kind of basses, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one. I'll put these videos up top for you if you want to go check them out for some more detail. But that's just pretty much rolling along throughout pretty much the entire track. I have a little bit of automation happening, some filtering just to move it in and out with the track, a little pitch modulation as well, it looks like. Without the pitch modulation, and with really subtle. And all these little bits and pieces are just automations and whatnot. And then we have this bass 1 here. Which I might have ended up muting. Yeah, I think I ended up muting this one. So let's move on to the top bass. Yeah. All right, so we have this top bass here. Let's have a look at that. Now the top bass, just yeah, I remember doing this bass 1 here, which was my kind of thought was having this low sub bass rolling along, and then 2 top layers, 1 and then more low mid, and this one kind of sitting on top of the low mid, which were both playing the same exact pattern, but this mid bass here ended up being just too much, so I just went with just the top bass. Remember right. Just gonna turn all these off for right now. We'll get to these in a second. Okay. So the top bass, I think I just used a sample for that, and it's just playing a really simple rhythm. But what's kind of making this sound interesting is I have it sent over to this reverb here, with the Valhalla Vintage verb, just a chamber setting, just kind of cleaned it up, band passed it there, and then distorted the reverb a little bit with this the Blood Overdrive plugin. And I'm automating the color here, so it's just giving it a slow kind of sweeping effect. which really makes that a little bit more interesting and evolving. As far as the sound itself and the processing, just a simple low cut and an EQ, or excuse me, some sidechain. So really quite simple there. I do have a couple parallel tracks set up for the basses as well. So this is also going through the chorus, with just the very low end cut off on the input here, and then run through this stock chorus, which is just kind of thickening things out a little bit. And then I also have this going through the distortion parallel track, or a little bit of it sent to this track anyways. This has the low end rolled off below 80, everything off below 80 is rolled off, and then the top end's rolled off, and then another instance of the blood overdrive. And then I have a parallel compression track as well for the basses. But this time using the 1176. And that's just, you know, pushing that forward in the speakers a little bit and just thickening it up. It's without the parallel tracks and the reverb. Okay, and then there's just some simple decay automation happening. Looks like every few bars here, the decay is kind of opening up a little bit. And then just some simple volume automation on that. The next bass element we have is this bass accent. Let's move over here. Which is just a little accent at the end of every 2 bars. And on this one, we just have a bandpass filter cutting out the unnecessary low ends below 100 to make room for the sub bass. And then a little bit of reverb. So really short decay, just a little bit of the mix, a little bit of a low cut here, a little bit of a high cut, just to give that bass a little bit of space, but not too much where it's going to muddy the mix up. And then I have that sent through the parallel compression, and a little touch is going through the distortion on that. And then some sidechain as well. So really simple. Okay, and then we have this bass fart here. There's a couple of these sprinkled throughout the track. Oh, and by the way, that bass accent that we just looked at was just a sample from one of my sample packs as well. Now this bass wash here, or bass fart, I made this in Native Instruments Monarch. So I took, it was either a saw or a square, I think it was a saw, and just kind of shaped it with a filter and amplitude envelope, and I ran it through a big long, it was either a big hall or plate reverb. I think I used the Valhalla Vintage Verb, and then I heavily distorted that reverb, and I distorted it with the UAD Culture Vulture distortion plugin, which I was demoing at the time. So I made a few different variations of this bass wash, and I was playing around with different distortion types, and I just ended up bouncing out a whole bunch of them that I've kind of have in my sample pack that I've used in various projects and whatnot. So that's where this sound came from. And let's see if there's any other additional processing on it. Looks like there is. So this is just there for gain staging purposes, that balance plugin. And then we have another EQ. Again, this had quite a bit of low-end information in it still, so I rolled off everything below 800, gave it a little boost in the mid-range, kind of rebalanced its frequency content, and gave this some auto panning, just kind of move it around a little bit, a slow pan over 2 bars, and then some extra delay to kind of, you know, extend its tail a little bit, and then some side chaining on that as well. And that is, looks like these bass washes are not going through the auxiliary tracks I have set up for the basses, so that's just going straight out to the pre-master. So that's that, and that occurs a couple times throughout the track. There's a few different subtle variations on that, but let's see. So we have that one as well. Looks like there is a few differences here. So this one has the pool tech on it, which is giving a very heavy boost at around 2K. It's really bringing out those mids. And with vintage modeled EQs, you can really get away with heavy-handed boosts, more so than you would, you know, on a digital EQ. So yeah, I really brought out the mid-range on this. It still has the same EQ'd a little bit different. So I took a little bit more of the low end off, and then a boost around 2K, whereas this one was around 1K. And then it looks like this is just here for automation purposes, this auto panning, and then also again some delay on this one as well, and some sidechain. So a couple subtle different variations on this first one, and you can see they're just kind of sprinkled around the track with some various volume automation as well. And then we have this bass accent 2, which comes in right here as well. So let's hear that. So now we have a bass accent at the end of each bar instead of every 2 bars. So this is just to, you know, pick up the energy even more so. Again, this is playing on the offbeat, same as this one, but now they're alternating every other bar. I believe this came from a sample. This was a sample as well. And little EQ work, so scooped out some of the lower mids around 200 and 250, and then it boosted around 450. And that is going through the reverb, the distorted reverb that I talked about with the blood overdrive that's being automated, and it's going through the distortion and the parallel compression as well. So that's pretty much all the bass sounds. let's have a look at the musical synth parts. Okay. I'm just going to turn these on. Okay, so the first thing that enters the track is, as far as synths go, is the synth pluck, which is one of the main driving forces in this track, and it's very simple, just a repeating rhythm. Let's hear it on its own. So originally I made this in Massive. I can't tell you exactly how. I can't even remember if I saved the patch, to be honest with you. But let's see what we have here. Rolled off all of the low end, you know, up to around 150, 160-ish. Did a little bit more EQ work, so again, kind of just scooped a little bit more of the low end off with the shelf, and then took out some harsh frequencies or muddy frequencies or unpleasant frequencies in the mid-range. And then some side chaining. Now I do know that I set up a macro or two in this, so I'm playing with maybe some distortion, delays, the filter, of course, within Massive, and I like to automate these things by hand. So once I have the sound kind of set up and working the way I want it to, then I'll just take a couple passes throughout the track and just automate these parameters by hand until I've got a take that I like. So you can hear, you know, the filter is kind of opening up in a few parts. But I mean, for the most part, the filter stays pretty closed throughout the track. And that spot that I just showed you is the only time that we get a note variation. Other than that, it plays the same simple rhythm throughout the entirety of the track. So to keep it interesting, I did a couple things here. The first thing I did was I sent it over to this auxiliary track here, which has little altar boy. It's pitched up 7 semitones, so it's pitched up a fifth, a little bit of drive there, and then I used this random LFO to control the send amount. So you can see that moving around right here, and that's just giving like little bursts at random of that that pitched auxiliary track. So you can hear that kind of popping in and out at random, which really adds, you know, to the interest of that synth part and makes it much more interesting, you know, throughout the entirety of a track. So you can hear that. It's subtle, but it makes a big difference, especially when you just mute it. So you can hear that working there. Another thing I did, you can see this one moving around too, this send amount. So this is just a simple reverb. Again, a chamber setting, 20 milliseconds or so of pre-delay, and then an EQ to roll off the low end and the top end on this, and a little bit of side chain on the reverb. auxiliary track. And what I did here was I set up another peak controller. This one's controlling the send amount of the reverb. So I set it up so the higher notes, or the louder notes, excuse me, are getting a little bit more of the reverb, and that makes it more expressive. So you can see that moving when I hit play. So yeah, simply the louder notes are getting a little bit more of the reverb there, and that's a really easy way to make something, you know, sound just a little bit more expressive, you know, that's playing just a simple rhythm like that. So those are a few things I did to make that sound more interesting. And then also we have a delay here, which is pretty simple. Use the stock Fruity Delay 3. It's playing eighth dotted, and a little distortion on the feedback. And that's it. Just an EQ, a little band pass on the delay. And then I also have a couple other auxiliary tracks or parallel tracks set up for the synths. I have a distortion, so I use the defacer plugin, and also a parallel compression track. I use the 1176 on this one as well, and all of my synth parts are going through those two. Okay, so quite simple. Let's see, we have our twinkles that start here. You can hear that. Okay, so the twinkles, let's have a look at them twinkles, shall we? Okay, so this I made in, I wanted like a kind of metallic sound for this, so I used FM8 to make this, and I gave it a splash of this space modulator plugin from Valhalla, and I used one of these lush reverb settings, which has like delay and chorusing going on, and it really puts it in a unique space. So I thought that fit this sound really nice and gave it a nice long tail, which is what I wanted for this sound. And then I added a little touch of compression to this. I gave it a little bit, looks like that was off. Maybe I was playing around with this and then decided not to use it, but anyways, it's just a stereo delay, quarter on the left and an eighth on the right. And it's a funny looking EQ here. So all the low ends rolled off up to around 600. Kind of notched out some frequencies here. And then rolled off the top end. This volume free G plugin is just there for automation purposes. And then I gave it a little bit of sidechain that's going through a couple auxiliary tracks here. So I have a reverb. Nope, don't have a reverb. I think I just decided to go with this space modulator on the actual insert instead of a send reverb. Have a delay set up here as well, though. Okay, so on this delay, we have the Fruity Delay 3, quarter notes, stereo delay pulled out quite wide, pulled the offset down quite a bit, so we get a nice wide delay sound. The feedback's very high on this, rolled off the top end of the feedback, gave it some distortion, and then I'm modulating the cutoff a little bit as well. I always like to add a little extra reverb to my delays as well. I really feel like it, for the most part, settles it into the mix a little bit better. So I added a little touch of the fruity reverb too here. Not very much, but just a little tickle of it. And then EQ'd this so you confine it to a specific frequency band, so we're not muddying up the mix too much with this delay. And I think this must be here for automation purposes as well, so I'm probably just drifting the pitch slightly, which is something I do quite often on delay returns and things like that. Even reverbs too. Sometimes I'll just do like either detune it a little bit or do like a subtle pitch drift on it. And then we have some side chaining, boop, and another pancake auto panner. This must be for automation as well. You know, maybe on occasion that gets automated up. One thing I did here, you can see this automation curve happening right here. So on this first one, I took off quite a bit of the high end to just introduce, because this is the first time this sound is being introduced in the track. So I didn't want to give too much away, so I just added a high shelf here. And then we can see on this one, the next time it comes in, we get all the high end coming in. That's just a really simple and easy way, or nice way, to kind of introduce a sound, is to, you know, the first time it enters the track, just give it a more aggressive band pass, or filter it down more aggressively, and then, you know, later on in the track you can really open it up and present the sound. And then this just has a few different variations on the actual notes being played. So it's like this one's the same, and then we have, and then we could have a look at the MIDI as well here. Let's see. So some very low velocities for the first couple notes of these little phrases, and just some subtle changes on the notes. No swing, it looks like. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple, really. Okay, so that's the twinkles sorted. The next synth element in this track is this synth swell. Let's actually turn everything else on. So So this is really here to kind of fill in the spaces and kind of be a counter melody to this simple synth pluck sound. So this, if I remember right, also came from FM8. It was a pad sound that I found, which was a preset. I ended up tweaking it to fit my track, and then I definitely did some processing on it. But again, this is something that I bounced out, so I can't remember the exact processing and what I did to tweak the preset. But I mean, it's pretty simple. I think this is looping over a bar or 2 bars and just playing a simple little rhythm. Yeah. Definitely some delay happening there. And then that plays throughout, but there is a variation that comes in on the breakdowns. So if we come here, you'll hear a subtle variation with the notes. Right there. Which just gives a little extra flavor and interest for the breakdowns. Yeah, cool. So I wish I could tell you a little bit more about how I made this track or that particular sound, but I can't. So let's move on. But there is a little EQ here after the fact. Rolled off the low end, scooped out probably some mud here, and gave it a little boost at 1K. So just to help it fit in the mix with all the other elements. And then again, that's going through the distortion and the parallel compression. The only other melodic part that I have is this little synth build, which is simply just meant to, again, I bounced this, but it's just a really simple little sound that helps introduce this section right here. And that's the kind of the main breakdown, where the main drop occurs right after that. So that's all of the melodic parts. Again, really not a lot, pretty simple for the most part. And let's have a look at the effects. So I have this atmosphere that's running throughout the track. Let's have a listen to that. And then I'm just, using some, well, not much volume automation except for the very end, but probably just filtering it in and out to kind of help build the energy, take away the energy, have it ebb and flow with the track with this filter. And I did a video not too long ago about some techniques that I like to use for making atmospheres interesting throughout an entire track. So I gave a couple different techniques that I like to use for doing so. So I'll put that video up there as well if you want to go check that out. Okay, so we have the atmosphere here. Let's see if there's any processing on this. Looks like there's not. I usually, make these atmospheres, layer up a few different sounds, get them kind of these different sounds looping at different lengths, and then, process them with various different techniques. I'll have to do a video on how I make my atmospheres. But yeah, this has been bounced out, and then I did a long jam session, which I talk about in that video I just mentioned, giving it some extra layers of interest. So let's move on. We have the atmosphere. We also have this little waterfall sound that plays a couple times. Oops. This is a nice little washed out effect sound, and it's different. It's not just a simple white noise. It's a little bit more interesting than that. So this is actually was taken from like a long shaker sound, and I just cut a little piece of it out and then ran it through one of these lush reverb settings from that space modulator plugin I mentioned that I used on the Twinkles, mixed quite high, and then gave it some extra delay quarter notes here with quite a long feedback tail, little side chaining on this, and band past it. So we're just have this frequency range here. Yeah, really simple, but effective, I think. And now we have this little space hit. Which I think that might be the only time that occurs throughout the whole track, is right here. And this is something that I made right then and there and then bounced it out, so I'm not sure where this came from. I can't remember. I really just like to make a sound, get it to where I'm happy with it, and then bounce it out and move on. A lot of times, I'll save like the channel settings so I can recall the plugins I've used, or even save a reference project and so I can go back to it. But I really just like to commit to sounds and move on, so I don't, so I'm not tempted to go back and fiddle and fiddle and fiddle and tweak and tweak and tweak. I really think it helps me, finish projects. So, moving on. Have a simple reverse crash here. I don't think I need to explain those. Got this little sound here. Effects cut one. Oops. Let's see what this is. Just some kind of ambient texture noise. I don't know where that came from, to be honest with you. And just a simple EQ to clean the low end up, and some delay. Okay, then I do have this Vox effect, which occurs kind of throughout the track, and I think is a pretty recognizable sound here. So I know on that Vox, I did some pretty heavy processing on that. This was actually a female vocal that I pitched down quite a bit, added some distortion, some delay, lots of reverb on it. And I can't tell you exactly, but that's pretty much the gist of how I made that. But that was a female vocal. I do remember that. And yeah, that occurs in throughout the track in a few different spots. And then we have some extra auto panning on that just to kind of move it around. I have this little synth effect here, which, let's listen to that. This works as a layer to the bass washes. Synth effects 1. Where are you? So it's just a really top end. Yeah, so band past this. So we're just getting the top end here. And this has a little delay on it as well. 1/8 notes. But this works. This was meant to be. This works as a layer to this bass fart here, which happens occasionally. So let's hear those two together. But I think those work really nice together, and that just, you know, that's being dropped in on occasion just to give, you know, some variation to these bass wash sounds. Now this little synth effects came from a sample pack as well. Let's see if I can find it. Which I pitched up by 5 semitones. But yeah, I just think it works really nice with this bass wash, and that's what it was meant to be. It was a layer for that, which is why I rolled off all of the low end to make room, you know, so it's not clashing with this. This is also, I think, a good time to talk about this big reverb, this big verb here, which is a reverb send I set up for effects mostly. I do this a little bit different now, but let's just walk through this. So we have an EQ, which I've talked about this before. And you know what? I've done a video on this particular method for setting up a big reverb. So I'm going to refer you to that video. I'm going to put the video up top if you want to go check that out, where I go through exactly what I'm showing you here, but you can check out that video if you want. And then I have this here, effects cut 2. These are just, I think, more of the same kind of ambient sounds. Let's check them out. Effects cut 2 and 3. Yeah, just some random like little sweeps and hits, run through a bunch of reverb, doing a, you know, back and forth type of thing. Simple EQ. This one had a variation with just some reverb on this one, or excuse me, some delay. And yeah, really simple. I can't remember where these came from, to be honest with you. So let's just move on. Let's see. Simple white noise. I don't need to cover that. That's pretty basics. Got this synth here. Synth effect 2. Oh yeah, I remember this. This was a simple like like stab that I made in Massive, I believe, and then I really, where it gets all of its character was I processed it in Guitar Rig. And I actually did another video on this as well, and I'll link that up here. I used the split mix in Guitar Rig with some reverbs, delay, and some interesting LFOs and modulation. So I'll refer you to that video up top, and you can see exactly, you know, the method I used to make this little effect if you want to go check that out. And that happens occasionally, a couple times throughout the track. And then we have this little sweep here. And that's getting sent through that big reverb. That's why it has that big long tail on it. But again, I can't remember where that one came from. That's pretty much it. I think I've showed you all the effect sounds. So yeah, that is an overview of SpaceFlex. I'm sorry I couldn't show you exactly where all the sounds came from, but I think still that gives you a good idea of how I made the track and some of my, you know, my thought process here. And yeah, hopefully you found some of these tips useful. Let me know if you did, and yeah, I'll catch you soon, everyone. Take care.